Welcome, folks, to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
And we are coming to you from these United States of America through the magic of Iowa Catholic Radio's studio, broadcasting you throughout the airwaves, wherever you hear this show, through Iowa, through Oklahoma, on the internet, on the interwebs, on our app. Thank you for listening. It's wonderful to have all of you here. I am here in Des Moines, Iowa, where I'm the Director of Mission and Ministry at Mercy College of Health Sciences and the Director of the Zeta Institute. You can find out more at mchs.edu. Bud, out there in Pittsburgh, America, tell people what you are doing out there in the great state of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I'm the Director of the National Institute for Newman Studies in Pittsburgh, and you can find out about all of our work at newmanstudies.org.
Now, Bud, to embarrass you on air, that's not all you've been doing this last week. You've not done much. As a family, you've been doing quite a bit. So you mind telling folks what your family's been up to in the last few days?
Oh, yeah, late on Monday night, it's all running together for me now. We had the arrival of number 7, Jim Rose. So that was exciting, but thank you everyone for your support and prayers. It went really smoothly. I never take it for granted to have, a healthy arrival and everything. So a shout out to my wife, Rachel, for, it was quite amazing. And her parents are here right now supporting us a bit, but happy to be on the show as well.
I was hoping you didn't mention, the extended family quite yet, because I wanted people to get the impression that your wife is like really tired with a newborn and like 6 other kids, and here you are on a show. But no. Of course, you have extended family, and especially since we're talking about the topic of family, what that means today, I just think it's really relevant to point out that you're an expert at this 7 times over, and to congratulate the entire Marr family. But from me and everyone at the radio show, tell Rachel congratulations. We hope she gets some rest.
Oh yeah, it's always, there's always little tidbits, unique things that happen whenever a birth occurs. And this go around, I think the big surprise was the midwives during the lead up were estimating like maybe a 6 or 7 pound baby, but Gemma ended up being at like 9 pounds 10 ounces. So like someone said on Facebook yesterday, she looks like a 2-month-old, but that's good. She's robust and healthy.
Well, my favorite part about this is, so I don't, just to air out, all sorts of Marr dirty laundry, you had 4 girls and then 2 boys. So now the boys have a younger sister, and I'm sure that sort of puts an entire new spin on their galaxy of understanding sibling relationships, that like there's actually a girl in the family younger than them.
Oh man. Yeah. And we're kind of keeping a close eye on Cyprian. He's a sweet little guy, our 2-year-old, but he's truly a bulldozer. And I don't think 2-year-old boys completely recognize their strength yet.
That's right. Especially in comparison to a newborn. Well, congratulations to the Marr family. Welcome, Jim Rose, and prayers to all of our recent mothers, expecting mothers, adopting mothers. There's a lot of people I know that are doing all sorts of stuff, and Mother's Day was a while ago, but it's always a good day to point out to mothers that we appreciate all that they do, and we're praying for you. As always, speaking of sort of the mother of this show, if I can make a horrible transition, we're always underwritten by Mercy College of Health Sciences. So thank you, Mercy College of Health Sciences, for making our show possible. mchs.edu. We are rolling through the summer semester, one of the most unique semesters in the summer that we've probably seen, not only because of everything going on in society at large, but also because we had a large class, the largest summer class we ever had. I think people are responding, Bud, exactly to this moment about wanting to help people, and Mercy College is exactly a place to go earn a degree where you can immediately go help others, to be a part of your community that brings healing to a world that needs it. mchs.edu.
Yeah, I've said this on the show before, but it's nice for me to remain connected and be able to teach there. And I guess being a part of it all, it was impressive to see the school pivot, and to be there, I think, as a presence in Des Moines during a time where a lot of people are thinking about public health and the need for quality medical professionals. So that's awesome.
So today on the show, speaking of Des Moines, we have not only all-stars on, the Uncommon Good. They've been on multiple times, but two all-stars for the entire Diocese of Des Moines, nay, maybe even the city of Des Moines. We don't get to have parades, but if we did, these two could have their own parade float. We have Adam Storey and John Huynh on the show, directors of Adam, the director of Marriage and Family Life, and then John, the director of Faith Journey and other catechetical aspects of the diocese. So it's always wonderful to have them on. We're going to pick their brains on the topic that I already threw out. We're going to talk about families, not only the good of family, but family and what it means to be family has been very much in the news, not only in the news of the Marr family, but nationwide as people are discussing what does a family mean? What do we mean when we talk about things like the nuclear family? Does that mean you have special powers that you can have X-ray vision? What do we mean by all of these terms and their sort of contested nature? And of course, talking about what the family means and how important that is to understanding the common good. It seemed like an obvious topic to have on. So it's wonderful to have our local friends on to talk about it. And we will be talking about that, the uncommon good, with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr right after these messages. We're back with the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you on this wonderful Wednesday. Thank you for listening, and we love having you all joining us on the show. Speaking of joining us on the show, our guests today, our local favorites, well known by all good people everywhere, at least in the Diocese of Des Moines. We have Adam Storey, Director of Marriage and Family Life, and we have John Huynh, Director of Faith Journey and other catechetical endeavors from the Diocese of Des Moines. Adam and John, thanks for joining the show.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah. Hey, Bo, how you introduced us earlier?
Yeah.
Can you tell that to Amy the next time you see her? My wife.
That you're an all-star everywhere.
That's exactly it.
Yes. I can do that because we're friends. Yes. Well, guys, it's great having you guys back on the show. And again, I want to say thank you for joining. I wanted to throw out a nearly impossible, gauntlet since we're close friends. Family, that one word that can raise the ire of many people, depending on what you want to say about it. In the news again. On one hand, we have people talking about the word nuclear family, especially seems to be coming up in different modes, different aspects. What people are talking about. What I have in mind specifically is it was a hot enough topic that David Brooks in The Atlantic wrote an article that said the nuclear family was a mistake. You have people who are defending the nuclear family, throwing it under the bus, all these things like this. And I thought, hey, who better to do this than to talk to someone who's employed to talk about family and marriage life, but then also someone who runs catechesis and talks about what our faith journey is like together, primarily talking with families. I guess the question starts to be, when we think of the word family to start off the show, Adam and then John, why do you think the topic of family, which seems to be, mundane by nature, it seems to be something we all have something of, it should go without saying. Why do you think the topic of family continually becomes such a topic of discussion and argumentation in our culture?
Well, I think, Bo, that's a good question. And I would say this is such an important topic on the one hand, because I think it speaks to kind of the very heart of who we are, that we're communal beings, that we're made for connection, we're made for relationship. And so even though it's something that all of us kind of have a natural or an intuitive knowledge of and even experience of, it's vital because it kind of touches at the taproot of who we are as people. But I also think it's important because, I think there's a particular way especially us as Americans, where we kind of can lose sight of the importance of family when we're such a independent, individualistic culture, and when this kind of is connected with the modern world, where we kind of I would say we try to control things more than really be stewards of things, and we can try to even take control of our connectedness, our relationships, the people we associate with. That's a real temptation in the modern world, but I also think it can have really negative effects on our experience of life. So I think there's a particular individualistic American temptation that can damage family life, but because it's at the root of who we are, I think it's really important to talk about it too.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna just basically affirm what Adam is saying. There is that we're born naturally into a family. I remember as a kid when there's this show. They've since turned it into a movie, and I don't know how popular it is in the U.S., but it's called The Monkey King. And the show began with a monkey, and the monkey is created out of a rock, no parents at all. And I just always thought, man, that was, I was 8 years old, reading about this, not a show at the time, but watching it later, and then reading about this monkey being created out of a rock, and just thought, man, that's kind of weird because everyone's is born out of and then the monkey, of course, finds other monkeys and becomes family with it. But that always stuck with me was that this monkey was created out of kind of not two beings. And then the other piece that Adam was talking about is there's this individualism, and I think there's a sense, an inclination in all of us to seek to be autonomous, to be free. I think, and so there's this inclination to want to be autonomous, but then there's this inherent sort of also inclination in our hearts to desire community, and that's really from the Christian perspective, right? Is that we desire to be with others rather than just by ourselves. And so we can't escape talking about family, about communion, especially because it's inherent, it's built into who we are. And for us as Christians, as Catholics, we say that we're created in the image and likeness of God, in the image and likeness of the Trinity, who is community. And so that's something that we can't escape desiring, and from that desire, talking about it.
Guys, it seems like one tension here, one tough point when we talk about these matters is that on the one hand, in Catholic theology, you sometimes get a real strong affirmation of the family. So I think of someone like John Paul II, and during his pontificate, he really wanted to re-emphasize that the family was the basic building block of society. On the other hand, like in Scripture, especially in the New Testament, you get some strong words that seem to cut the other direction. And I think especially Jesus saying things like, anyone who leaves father and mother, even I think spouse, will receive like 100-fold for the kingdom, or sometimes chastises those who, when he says, follow me, there's the man that wants to go back and bury his father. Mm-hmm. And Christ says, like, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head, etc. So you have those kind of two pieces of our tradition. And I've been thinking about this morning. I'm curious with your thoughts. Like, when we have these conversations, do you think sometimes the misunderstanding is around equivocation? So one writer or group is talking about the family in this way, and we want to affirm the positive that's there, but we also recognize that as Catholics, like, maybe the way that America thinks about the nuclear family isn't exactly what we have in mind or want to affirm. So I'm curious, like, in your guys' ministries, when you talk about family, do you try to bring in some of those nuances, or how do you use that descriptor in your conversations with other Catholics?
But I think that's a really good question and insight that you're pointing to. And, I think there is that tension, but I think what we see is family it's really about a communion of persons. It's about this interconnectedness and this, these deep relationships in Christ, and in the church, and in his salvific plan. He's calling us into a new communion, into a different communion, that I don't think his intention is to negate the first communion, but it's to draw us to a new level. One of the things I think about is sometimes we have this idea that the Christian communion or the Christian relationships that we're drawn into, the difference between the two families is the first family is given. My parents are given, my siblings are given. That's just received. But the new communion is chosen. I get to choose who I associate with. I get to choose who I'm in relationship with. And I don't think that that's the case at all. I think that the Christian vision of family, the Christian vision of the body of Christ, of the new communion, is just as much given and something to be received, and not to try to control or to try to cut out the parts that we don't like. It's a new level of communion, but both are given and to be received, and to be entered into, rather than to try to control or to try to choose.
Yeah, I think there's a multifaceted use of that word family, right? It's almost like the word love, and you see some guy you work out with, he's like, "What's up, fam?" That's kind of a lower tier of communion there, in terms of family, if you will. And then there's the immediate family, and there's the family that we belong to, that's the church. So you're right in the sense that as Adam is pointing out, there are different levels of communion. But I think overall, when we say family, David Brooks actually points this out, right? Some of us actually means kinship. And families can be, there's this natural family unit that you're born into and you're tied to, but there are families that could be created simply out of intentionality. So for instance, in historically speaking, the Asians, the Vietnamese, and the Chinese, I know this, you can become brothers simply by cutting a little bit of your finger, having a drop of blood into a glass of wine. Both of you do that, you drink that, and you are now essentially kind of like blood family. And your kinship is even tighter than a quote unquote friendship that you used to have, right? So there are different kind of levels of familial union, if you will, and one is very much intentional, the other is non-intentional. But I think especially when we talk about in a theological perspective, our family, the deepest sort of the deepest communion that we can have is with God, and so it's primary.
Yeah, Dewey, I think that, excuse me, John, the bringing that up is a really important aspect about what David Brooks is bringing up, and the sort of worldwide different connotations of family. So when we think of the nuclear family, and really I think this was sort of a subset of the sort of atomic age, and because when this is all figured out and really identified, this idea that there is a sort of basic building block that is a family and is essentially so. So you have a mom and a dad and whatever children they have. And the idea is like that atomically, right, is like the nucleus with its protons and neutrons and electrons, right? That's the idea. And then everything else is sort of added onto that. But in the same way that it talks about the atomistic age, is that, okay, these families now can sort of bounce around anywhere and stay family. And this was in contradistinction to what came immediately before this. So as David Brooks points out, and I think he has a point, the sort of heyday of the nuclear family is the most natural building block in the United States was basically 1950 to 1965, this sort of short post-war sort of idea. Before that, you have extended families that are almost entirely agricultural in mind, and they really do. There's different ways this happens, but for hundreds of years in most of the world that was agricultural in any sort of sustained way, you really do have what we would, I think, call extended families that would have not only multiple what we would call nuclear families. So we would have like grandparents, and then we would have different moms and dads with children, and then we'd have aunts and uncles. And because you had a lot of aunts and uncles, because everybody had more kids, not all of them got married, a lot of them stayed around the farm. You had people, of course, died earlier, right? So you had kids who then had parents who were remarried. You start to see about how immediately you can understand family in the strongest terms as sort of a group of 25 to 30 people. And David Brooks's point is that for most of human life, in agricultural societies specifically, but then you even go back and look at sort of like the tribal beginnings of humanity, and there's certainly things like this as well, that the sort of idea of like 2 parents and 2.5 kids, as the joke always goes, only has a very short blip in human history. And it's only since then that we see that nuclear family falling apart that we start to talk about this ideal of the nuclear family. And I think David Brooks's main point is the reason that we see families disintegrating now, the individualism that Adam and John talked about, is because the nuclear family already was sort of a step at disentangling ourselves from the deep ties that would make being in a place and things like this. He points out that the rise of nuclear families maps the rise of people moving into towns and working into factories. But he also says that the sort of ability to have a nuclear family as an ideal only worked for a while because people did their best imitation of extended families.
Right.
But mostly it was like with neighborhoods and front porches and things like this. And so when people start to talk about the nuclear family or criticisms of it, that's where I think it's important to be honest, like you said, about human history and even cultural differences, that what we mean by family, even though the most basic building block of it is certainly a mom and a dad and the children they have, that for a lot of human history, if you said the word family or whatever equivalent that was in whatever language, that people would immediately conjure to mind about 20 to 30 people and not say 3 to 5. And that really is a sort of difference maker in all these discussions that we have.
That's right. And, it's normally, so in our culture, at least, when you talk about family, you name the patriarch of the family, the head of the family. And so as soon as you say the family of this person, you immediately think of everyone else that comes with that person, right? So the wife, the kids, the grandkids, and all of that stuff. So that's exactly it. But one of the things that's very curious to me, as you talk about the nuclear family, that's sort of, from the 50s and the 60s, and there's an imitation of, or rather trying to be like the families that are in the 1800s and so on and so forth. One of the things that really intrigues me is what I would call familial sort of solitude that's progressed from it, is this idea that I think, as the nuclear family progresses to simply be somewhat essentially autonomous from others, there seems to be kind of a solitude that comes with that it's not just like a singular solitude, but the family is kind of set off apart from everything else. And if something fails in that family, it just simply fails, rather than being able to be in some sense put together again by extended family.
I think, Bo, one of the things that you mentioned that I think is important is the movement to the nuclear family being this disentanglement that you mentioned, this, breaking apart of this web of connections. And a lot of the people who will, be advocates for the family, who will speak to the family today, they speak to the family, but they also, I think, still desire a disentangled way of living, an independent way of living. And I think it's important to see that these things go together, that we ought to be connected to each other. We ought to be dependent on each other. And, I think as someone who, lives an upper middle class existence, I think of how much money we spend and how much we invest in not having to be vulnerable with other people. We're happy to help other people if they need help. But God forbid if I need somebody to help me paint my garage, I'm just going to hire somebody to do it. Or if I need somebody, if my lawnmower breaks, am I going to borrow my neighbor's, or am I going to go out and get a new lawnmower? And that connectedness, I think, is really important because it's really human. And as we, advocate for the family, I think we equally need to advocate for connectedness and even vulnerability.
And I
So,
think
Adam, go ahead, John. Yeah, we got a minute left. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's what David Brooks was getting at, right? Is that the more affluent you are, the more able you're, in some sense, to carry out this nuclear family without attachments, with disentanglement. You can pay for things that normally, traditionally, would have been done by extended family, babysitting, for instance. That's you're able to pay for all sorts of stuff so that you can carry on your life as before.
No, and I think, well, look, we're up on the break. So when we get back, a lot to talk about, a lot of great stuff that we set up for the next part of the show. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr will be back right after these messages. We're back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this wonderful Wednesday. Thank you for joining us on the show. Our guests are Iowa Catholic Radio and Des Moines Diocese All-Stars Adam Storey and John Huynh. Adam and John, thank you for joining the show.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so guys, Bud, as we've pointed out earlier, just had, he didn't himself, but his family had kid number 7, which makes him the dominant alpha male on this call. So I figured that out of the second segment, we should make sure to let him ask the first question.
We all know that's not true, but I'll take it. I'm gonna splice that audio and play it for myself when I wake up in the morning just to get pumped up for the day. Adam, I loved your point about like embracing vulnerability and radical hospitality. And I think it ties back to some of what I was thinking about with Christ in the Gospels. And Jesus is upfront that his message is going to divide some people from each other, and in some cases, even brother against brother and sister against sister. Obviously, I think we'd be misinterpreting that passage if we thought our Lord meant like just be a jerk at Thanksgiving or like, ignore the rest of your family so that you can purchase another jet ski. And so I'm really intrigued by this idea of so when we talk about the nuclear family, I do think there's a way in our culture that it's become another form of almost a level of individualism where it's like an isolated group that's primarily focused on its own interests. And to borrow an idea from Scott Hahn, coming into the Catholic faith, one thing that I was struck by is that God has provided through the Catholic Church family relationships at every level. So we call the Pope father, we call monks brothers and nuns sisters, and sort of on down the line. And I guess I've been struck by sort of like the creativity of the Catholic faith to so to speak, like fill in the gaps. And what I have in mind is that I think the experience of family over the last 40 or 50 years in our country has not been a positive thing for a lot of people. And in some cases, they found themselves more isolated than people would have been 100 years ago. And when I think about Catholics giving sort of like a different, like a countercultural message regarding the family, like we have to be sure to preach not only what we believe about, fidelity in marriage and birth control, et cetera, but also to remind folks that like the priority, like the highest end, kind of like Dewey intimated at the beginning of the show, is that our most important commitments are this new family that we've been called into. And I guess I'd be interested in hearing from you guys, like ways that you think about the Catholic Church sort of filling in those gaps or being creative. And I guess I'll kick it off for myself. Like, one of the biggest thing is religious orders and the sort of like creativity and flexibility that they have. Thinking historically, when individuals or citizens were economically vulnerable or on the margins of society, a lot of times they could look to the works of monasteries and convents as ways to find material provision, to plug themselves in the community, et cetera. And I worry that we've kind of even lost that, like monks and nuns are just not as visible in our context as they were in previous eras. But other ideas that you guys might have.
Go ahead, Dewey. John.
Thanks, Adam. For me, I think the sacraments of initiation are great ways that show so this familial kinship. I mean, we've lost some of that, and it's my favorite harping point is especially when it comes to baptism. Baptism is a public affair. It's a welcoming of someone into the church, and I spoke about this yesterday. But I'd like to see that as part of a public celebration rather than a private celebration. And so my favorite things at St. Peter's when on a Sunday, first Sunday of the month, is to see a new child or a new little kid come into the parish, being baptized into the parish, being baptized into the family, the Catholic family. It might make the mass go a little longer, but that's what we find important in our faith. And so baptism, the sacraments of initiation, are great ways that our church has come to sort of fill these gaps, as you will.
So, Bud, when I was thinking about that, I was thinking of, I think when it's healthy, there's an opportunity for a parish community to provide that kind of broader interconnectedness. And, this I think was a lot more obvious or present when many of our parishes were ethnic parishes. I also think that a healthy expression, something I'm a fan of, is parish boundaries, because I think that, authentic community is given more than it's chosen. And so you have to be a part of the community that you've been given. And I'm not trying to, make a big argument, because I think there's lots of complexities within this context. But I do think that, in a healthy parish life, you ought to be able to recognize that the people that are in the pews with you are people that you can rely on, people that you can reach out to, and people that are going to be with you even when you face really difficult situations and difficult circumstances. I think that's a way that broader family context can be lived out in our Catholic culture today.
Well, so would you guys say that like what we're aiming to do is disrupt a sort of Western prescribed idea of the nuclear family structure as a requirement? So what we're going to do is support each other as extended families and villages and collectively care for one another. Do you think that's a good way of putting what we're after?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, ideally.
I think expand the web of connectedness. That I do think, if it's exclusively a focus on the nuclear family, we can enter into a sort of individualism in the, just a broader individualism than any particular person. So broader connectedness, broader kind of communal reliance, I think is what we ought to advocate for.
Now, guys, the reason I put it that way is because I am a turkey that has walked you into a trap. That definition is from the Black Lives Matters group's website. It's the description of what they think family should be like. Now, I want to point out something. The rest of the sort of like points that surround this, there's plenty of things that disagree with Catholic teaching. So I'm not trying to like make any sort of point about that aspect at all. What I want to point out
is that a description that had been thrown out as being delirious of the Catholic understanding of family, I think has not really been properly engaged with. Now, there's also, like I said, there's all sorts of problems with maybe like specifics and like theories that they bring up and aspects that they go to. But what I want to point out is, folks, we've been talking about what we mean by an extended, expanded version of the family. And just like all three of these guys, Bud, John, and Adam, just said, is that we already have in the church an expanded idea beyond the sort of consumption unit of mom, dad, and kids buying stuff in a house, which is where the idea of the nuclear family really comes to. And so when you guys hear in the world of media, when you're talking with people, and this goes back to what we mean about it being a contested subject that people don't necessarily think through. When people throw out, are things pro or against family? It's imperative of Catholics to ask what we mean, because of course, all good things can be rendered in an idolatrous way. And one of the chief idolatrous ways is to make even something the family, which Adam and John have both pointed out, the goal is to bring you outside of yourself, to imitate the Trinity and the communal nature of the Trinity. But we can even make that intimate community, our first families, into something like selfishness. And I think you guys have done a beautiful job pointing out that family is always expanding, right? It's like the love of God, it's diffusive. And so that we always need to make sure to extend and grow that interconnectedness of families. Now, I know you might not ever come onto the show again, or you might not ever answer yes or no if you agree something without asking me where I'm quoting it from. But beyond being angry at me, do you think that, like, guys, that's part of the problem is we assume that like family is like a box, check yes or no, instead of really drilling down and asking, what do we mean when we say support the Catholic understanding of the family?
Yeah, I still feel comfortable with that affirmation, and I think, I mean, there's the family question, but there's also the broader comment that I think so much of our, and this is family related too, since we're not as interconnected as we used to be. So much of our conversations have just become power struggles, and the idea that I can't give any ground or I can't concede any point because if I do, that weakens my position. And that's how adversaries communicate with each other, but it's not how family communicates with each other. When a family is having a conversation, people can disagree heatedly and still learn from each other and still grow. And so I think the affirmation still stands, and I think that even the fact that if anything is mentioned by Black Lives Matters that it becomes toxic, I think that in itself is a toxic environment too.
Right. Same way here. When we talk about family and we think, okay, well, family is just this nuclear unit, and not treated as if it's a kind of a communal thing. What ends up happening is when you have a family, a nuclear family that is impoverished, and then the father leaves, let's say, and I think this is the contention point, right? Because when people say we want to preserve the family, what they're trying to say is, we want a father and mother. Sure, we don't disagree with that. Or I don't disagree with that. What I do see, though, is when you simply focus on the nuclear family as, again, as you say, a consumption unit, what happens is there's this solitude of the family. And so when the relationship breaks, when the father leaves, what ends up happening is, you're left with a broken unit that there's no support. And so you're dealing with children raised in homes, and they'll suffer for it. The family suffers for it because there isn't any sort of support. And so when we focus so much, and as we're talking about here, this notion of the nuclear family taking off, and in a very real sense, being the universal image of family, what happens is when it breaks, there is no support to fix it.
And it doesn't have to be like divorce either. Like people die. I think that's something
or
that,
like right.
And
Exactly.
So anyway, I think your point's exactly, that it's not only people that have like a lot of money between two adults. It's also, like you said, people who go through life acting like no bad thing will ever happen to this unit until like they're good and ready to die when they're 80 and stuff like that. I mean, that's nice when that happens, but throughout most human history, especially if you're working in agriculture or mining or things like this, I mean, fathers died all the time, and there's just countless stories of people being raised by uncles and things like this.
I mean, I was sharing with you like the film, like Ordinary People. It's an old film, right? But they're kind of well off. They're a what you would call a nuclear family. 2 parents, 2 kids, and one kid happens to have drowned due to a swimming accident. The mother blames the other son for not helping or whatever, and so the family falls apart without any help. I mean, there's just nothing. And so you look at this family and you go, okay, this is the family that has it all. And from the outside, sort of everyone else thinks this family has it all. But then suddenly you realize they don't. And when disaster happens, there's no one else to rely on, nothing to fix it, to help mend it.
Yeah, and I think as we think about these matters, for myself and thinking about my own spiritual journey, like we have to remember as well that the formation starts really early, because it feels sometimes like in the church we're occasionally trying to do triage like after things have gone wrong. But this is more of a comment, and maybe you guys can jump in with your analysis of how far off I am. But like in our culture, I feel like we've settled into a very romantic understanding of marriage, in the sense like that relationship is supposed to provide you with ultimate happiness. And we communicate this at relatively young ages through film and music and things like that. And maybe Adam, you could share like in terms of like preparing couples to marry. I don't know. I don't want to sound like too bitter about my past or anything, but like like as a young person, I don't know if I got a lot of like formation and direction about what marriage, family entailed beyond it will provide you with personal happiness, right? And so what are those other pieces that we need to be communicating with our young people, our young adults, as they're moving towards that relationship?
Well, Bud, I think that's a excellent and important point. And absolutely, in marriage preparation, we do try to address that, but kind of, as you said, in a sort of a triage way, because there is kind of this formation that's provided that marriage is going to be blissful and no conflict and no adversity, and it's going to follow the plot of a romantic comedy. And there's even at times a temptation within the church, I think, to try to sort of out romantic comedy the romantic comedies, that will say, well, all that's true, but if you're faithful, it'll even be more true. And that's just not reality. So I think, the most important formation that we have is the stories that we tell. And when you talk about extended family, I think it's particularly important because sometimes those stories are verbalized, but most often they're just witnessed, that you see the way, cousins and aunts and uncles and parents and grandparents, you see the way they live out their family life, and you see examples of success and you see examples of failure, but you're still all knit together. And that's the most important kind of formation that we receive. Is the stories that we tell around the table, and it's the stories that we witness just in living a common life.
Adam, it brings up like something that problematizes everything that I've said. Like, so with my family on my mom's side, like, so the closest to like what I know of personally of an extended family like this would be my mom's brothers and sisters and sort of like her family. So the primal story in all of that, though, of the Gibsons is that I had multiple, like, so my granddad and his brothers, multiple of them ran away from home to go join the military. because it was easier than living Pentecostal life of farmers, so much so that my great grandma despised high schools because they took kids away during harvest, right? Like she didn't want her younger kids to go to high school because she thought it was disrupting their way of life. And I had multiple people my granddad's age who were like, we're going to go do something easy and go fight in wars compared to living with grandma and living on the farm. And what's interesting, right, is like beyond like a lot of other family dynamics that it's too late to bring up, for a generation, like my mom's brothers and sisters are extremely close. And so it seemed like they were trying to do what like David Brooks was saying, where they took the good of the extended family, but then the good of not being like, let's not send kids to high school so that they farm wheat their entire lives, right? There's a balance to be had there. But it really only lasted a generation. My generation, like I love my cousins, and when we were growing up, we were really close. I see all of them far less now. And I know that my kids have even less of a sort of connection there. I think what I'm trying to throw out, because of course it's here at the end and it sounds like I'm throwing our entire discussion under the bus, but what I'm trying to say is that, and I got this from both of you guys, family is something that has to be continually worked at. And it's if it's a virtue, that means that there's two extremes. There's the extreme of acting like it's just blood and soil and sort of all the things we get worried about when we hear things like Nazis, or we hear things like, great grandmothers who don't want kids to go to school. But on the other hand, to act like the only thing that matters is sort of like consumption and choices and chosen family and doing what you want. It seems like what the Gospels, like Bud pointed out, with like there being a pro and con tension between families, is that only in Christ we're going to be able to hold together those two extremes. We've unfortunately come to the end of the show. And so I want to first of all say, Adam and John, thank you guys for coming on the show and letting me, trick you with quotations and stuff. That's the sort of friendship we have. Thank you guys for coming on the show.
Thanks, Bo. Thanks, Bud.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And also want to say, Bud, thank you for being a sterling example of family, not only because you just had another kid, but I think a lot of us feel that we belong in the extended universe of the Mars. So thank you for that, Bud.
Oh, no doubt. It's great having those guys on.
This is the Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, in our families, extended and otherwise, in our cities, our states, our nations, the entire world, solar system, galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is the Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.